Welcome to the Restricted Handling Daily Intel Brief. Let's dig in. Here's what's been going on in Russia in the last 24 hours. Moscow has now publicly confirmed there was no formal agreement coming out of the Alaska summit with the United States. No signed deal, no binding framework, no hidden breakthrough waiting behind the curtain. Just discussions, proposals, and a lot of political narrative that didn't actually harden into anything real. That matters because for a while, parts of the Russian messaging ecosystem treated that summit like it had produced momentum, something structured, something usable. That framing is now gone at the highest level. At the same time, Russia is still trying to keep pieces of that conversation alive. Officials are referencing past U.S. proposals as if they remain part of an open diplomatic track. But here's the split that really defines the moment. Moscow is saying it is open to future dialogue, while also flat out rejecting Ukrainian ideas to pause or limit long-range strikes or reshape the battlefield into partial freezes. So what you're seeing is a diplomatic posture that moves in two directions at once. Open door language on one side, maximum objective war aims on the other, and neither side is giving ground in a meaningful way. Now zoom out, because the second layer here is how information and perception are being managed on both sides of this conflict. Russia continues to project steady battlefield momentum, especially in eastern Ukraine. The messaging is consistent. Advances are happening across multiple axes, pressure is increasing, and Ukrainian capabilities are being minimized in official commentary. But when you line that up against independent battlefield assessments, what emerges is a more uneven picture. Pressure in some sectors, stagnation in others, and no decisive operational breakthrough that shifts the war's trajectory in a fundamental way. This gap between narrative and ground reality is becoming one of the most important features of the conflict right now. Not just propaganda versus truth, but competing systems of describing the same battlefield in totally different ways. And Ukraine is actively working to widen that gap. Because while Moscow is pushing forward on the front line, Ukraine is applying pressure much deeper inside the Russian system. We're talking sustained long-range strike activity, targeting energy infrastructure, logistics nodes, and transport routes. Refineries, fuel distribution points, and supply arteries are all in that mix. The result is not just localized damage, it is system friction, fuel shortages showing up across regions, rationing in certain areas. Discussions inside Russian government circles about importing gasoline. That is a notable shift for a country that usually sits on the other side of the global energy equation. Putin has acknowledged the disruptions, but the framing remains controlled. The official line is that the situation is manageable, not critical. But the fact that it is being discussed at all, at that level, tells you something has changed in terms of internal pressure. And this is where the strategic logic starts to come into focus. Ukraine is not just trying to hit military targets. It is trying to force operational trade-offs inside Russia. If fuel moves toward domestic stability, it is not moving toward the front. If air defense systems are protecting cities, they are not protecting logistics corridors. It is a constant redistribution problem. Now bring in the battlefield layer, because it ties directly into that resource strain. The heaviest pressure remains in eastern Ukraine, particularly around the Donetsk operational zone. The key point of friction right now is the belt of fortified cities that anchors Ukrainian defense in the region. Kostiantynivka sits right in the middle of that system. Russian forces are continuing infiltration-style attacks there. Small groups, constant probing, heavy use of drones and glide bombs to support movement rather than large armored breakthroughs. The goal is not speed, it is erosion. Ukrainian forces are responding with layered defense and counterattacks where opportunities open up. The line is under pressure, but it is not collapsing, and it is not producing the kind of breakthrough Moscow narrative suggests. Think of it less like a sweeping advance and more like a slow compression campaign against a hardened defensive structure. Now, stepping away from the front line for a second, Europe is continuing to deepen its role in this conflict in a way that is worth paying attention to. The European Union has moved forward with multi-billion euro funding specifically directed toward Ukraine's drone capabilities. not general military aid in the traditional sense, but targeted investment into unmanned systems, production capacity, and strike technologies. That is important because it locks in a particular direction for the war. It signals that European planners are not just thinking about sustaining Ukraine, but about scaling its ability to conduct long-range distributed strike operations over time. Drones are no longer an accessory to this conflict. They are becoming a core structural layer of how it is fought. And that loops right back into Russia's internal stress problem. Because as Ukraine expands strike capability, Russia is forced to expand internal defense capacity. More air defense coverage, more interceptors, more logistics protection. That creates a kind of defensive inflation inside the system. Everything becomes more expensive, more dispersed, and harder to prioritize. Inside Russia itself, the security environment is tightening alongside this. There are ongoing reports of espionage cases, sabotage allegations, and internal investigations involving individuals accused of passing military-related information or assisting foreign intelligence services. At the same time, Russian authorities are also pursuing corruption cases inside the defense establishment, including procurement fraud and misuse of contracts. Put those together, and you get a picture of a system that is not just dealing with external pressure, but also internal friction inside the institutions responsible for sustaining the war effort. And then there is the information layer, which continues to evolve in a more modern direction. Russian state-linked media and affiliated channels are increasingly relying on highly curated visual content to reinforce claims of battlefield success. That includes selectively edited footage, highly controlled narratives around territorial control, and messaging designed to project inevitability. The goal is less about persuading external audiences and more about maintaining internal cohesion around a consistent storyline. But the battlefield itself is resisting that simplicity. Even in areas where Russian forces are applying sustained pressure, the outcomes remain incremental. Advances are slow, gains are contested, and in many sectors, there is no confirmed change in control despite heavy operational activity. Now, briefly on internal security dynamics. Russia continues to report interception of Ukrainian drones over its territory, including activity reaching into the Moscow region. Airports have been temporarily disrupted, and civilian infrastructure has occasionally been affected by debris or secondary damage. These are not large-scale strategic shocks in isolation, but they reinforce a broader condition. The rear area is no longer insulated from the war. Ukraine, on the other side, continues to report detention of individuals accused of working with Russian intelligence networks, gathering targeting data on military positions, logistics hubs, and local infrastructure. So intelligence activity is running both directions, with each side trying to map and disrupt the other's depth networks. Finally, there is a quieter but important economic strain developing inside Russia's aviation sector. A growing portion of commercial aircraft is now grounded due to maintenance constraints and parts shortages. The impact is uneven, with larger state-linked carriers managing better than smaller operators, but the overall direction is the same: reduced capacity and higher operating costs. Over time, that kind of constraint feeds into broader economic friction, especially when layered on top of fuel instability and logistics disruption. Thanks for listening and for being part of this community. If you want to support the show, leaving a review or a thoughtful comment helps others discover it. We also share a daily written intel brief on Substack, restrictedhandling.substack.com, where we go deeper on Russia and China, along with broader coverage of Iran, the Middle East, and the DPRK. Wishing you a great day ahead.